All right, welcome to another meeting of your House Corporations Elections and Political Subdivisions. Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Harrelson. Representative Harshman. Vice Chairman Knapp. Representative Newsom.
Here.
Representative Ottman. Here. Representative Wiley. Here. Representative Yin. Here. Chairman Olson.
Here.
Thank you.
And just a little cleanup on our meeting notice. We will hear House Bill 211 and House Bill 279. House Bill 164 was noticed by accident. That's actually on the general file in the House, so we won't be hearing that again for a second time. And the sponsor of House Bill 242 has requested that we hold the bill back. So even though it's been noticed, unless somebody has an extreme objection to that, we won't be hearing House Bill 242 either. We'll start with House Bill 211. That's my bill. So Mr. Vice Chairman, if you don't mind taking over, I'll go down to the testimony table.
Okay, committee, we have before us House Bill 211, presented by Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So I bring you House Bill 211, ballot harvesting, or more accurately titled the prohibition or restriction on and clarification on ballot harvesting. Wyoming statutes are actually silent on the harvesting of ballots. This bill seeks to, number one, clarify ballot harvesting on a micro scale, that is by immediate family or designee. We want to allow that. There's good reason to allow that. And because our statutes are silent, this bill seeks to clarify that that is permissible. And then number two, this bill prohibits ballot harvesting on a macro scale. So we're dealing with, when we're talking about companies, political parties, and organizations, this is what we want to prohibit from occurring in Wyoming. At times, a voter may be unable to return his or her ballot in person or get it to a post office in time for it to be counted. In these cases, the voter may entrust the completed ballot to someone else. That can be an agent or a designee to return the ballot. In some states, such as Alabama, only the voter can return the ballot. So that's the extreme end of the spectrum. Other states like Rhode Island and Wyoming do not explicitly specify who or may not return a ballot on behalf of a voter. Again, our laws are silent. In 31 states, someone other than the voter is explicitly allowed to return a voted ballot on behalf of another voter. 31 states allow that. We would join the majority of states with this bill. Many of these states limit this provision to a family member, a household member, or a caregiver. 16 states allow a voter to designate someone, not necessarily a family member, but someone, not necessarily a household member or caregiver, to return their ballot. This bill does that. This bill would allow either an immediate family member, and I've already had some discussion with folks, and we'll have some in the bill about the definition of blood relative. This bill allows an immediate family member or a designee. So if your spouse is not your blood relative, don't stress. You can designate an immediate. You can designate them. They don't have to be your immediately family member because you have the ability to designate someone. Among 31 states where a voter can authorize someone to return a ballot on your behalf, 9 limit how many ballots an unauthorized person can return. So 9 states limit the number of ballots. 4 limit how long those ballots can remain in an unauthorized person's possession before being returned. These limits are based on a concern that saving people the task of returning their ballot can bleed into encouraging them to vote a certain way. Under this bill, a designee is capped at harvesting only 2 ballots per election. And then lastly, a violation of this statute is a misdemeanor, 6 months or $1,000 fine or both. And that's under 22-26-120 and 22-26-112. With that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I'll walk you through the bill. First page of the bill, definitions that are contained in this chapter apply to the words and phrases in the election code. And they are as follows over on page 2. Immediate family member under existing statute means a spouse, parent, sibling, child, or other person. We're striking person and replacing it with blood relative. So again, that was what we'll see how that plays out in the actual ballot harvesting definitions. Completing and returning of ballot. So upon receipt, a qualified elector shall mark the ballot and sign the affidavit. That's existing statute. The ballot shall then be sealed in an inner ballot envelope, existing statute, and we're striking mailed, delivered to the county clerk by a qualified elector or a designated person subject to the requirements in subsection B and C of this section. So again, a designated person. I want that to be really clear because even though we're adjusting the definition above from any other person to a blood relative, well, an immediate family member is only one category of people that can return a ballot. A designee, you can simply designate any person on earth to return the ballot for you. And they can return it in the following methods. Number 1, mail. Number 2, they can hand deliver it to the county clerk's office. Number 3, they can deposit it into a ballot drop box. I know there's some discussion to be had about these drop boxes. This is the only mention in Wyoming statute of a drop box because it is a currently accepted method that was placed in the bill. Next, a qualified elector who has designated another person to return the elector's marked and sealed ballot on the elector's behalf shall notify the county clerk of the designee using a form prescribed by the Secretary of State. This paragraph is really important because, again, I'm going to go back to the spouse example. If you want your spouse to deliver the ballot to you under the definition of immediate family member, they are not your blood relative. Well, that's okay. All you have to do is fill out the form prescribed by the Secretary of State, designate your spouse, and they can return your ballot. Simple as that. Section C. A designated person returning an absentee ballot to the county clerk on behalf of a qualified elector shall deliver not more than 2. So this is the limitation on harvesting. You can only harvest up to 2 ballots for any primary election, for any general election, or for any special election. You're limited to 2. The restriction in this subsection does not apply to designated persons delivering the absentee ballot of immediate family members. So now you're immediately that's where the immediate family member section comes into play. They don't have the restriction on the number of ballots they can return. Lastly, I know that you have an amendment in front of you from the county clerks. As far as the first section of that amendment, I'll let the county clerks discuss it, and I'm still interested in hearing more about it. The second provision in their amendment deals with the sheriff's office investigating. In my opinion, that amendment's probably not necessary. This bill doesn't have to specify that an investigation would take place. If someone suspected ballot harvesting outside of the parameters of what's allowed in this bill, they simply would turn that into either a prosecutor or the sheriff's office for investigation. And under existing law, 22-26-120 is an existing statute that says violation of an election code when a specific penalty is not imposed. So we already have a statute that says if there's not a specific penalty imposed or process, what have you, if the election code does not impose a specific penalty for the willful violation of a provision prohibiting a specific act, and this would prohibit those specific acts of harvesting ballots, then whoever knowingly commits a violation or fails to discharge that duty is guilty of a misdemeanor, punishable by the penalty prescribed by the statute. So I don't think that entire process is, from that clerk's amendment, is necessary in the bill, because the bill falling under our election code falls within the parameters of 22-26-120, which would say, hey, If you've collected 3 ballots, for example, or you're not an immediate family member, or you're not a designee and you're harvesting ballots, then you violated a law and you're guilty of a misdemeanor. I also know I've been asked the question about the blood relative. Are you going to make the clerk's office figure that out? No, that's kind of silly to think of it that way. The way it would work is whoever suspected ballot harvesting and turned this person in for harvesting a ballot, whether they were or were not a blood relative, would be part of the investigation by a sheriff's office. And if a prosecutor chose to move forward with a case under 22-26-120 that they had committed a misdemeanor offense and chose to prosecute it, well, the state would have the burden of proving whether that person was a blood relative or not. But I don't think anything in this bill would require the clerk's office to stand at the desk and simply check every person that comes in, whether they're a blood relative or not. I think that would be up to the state under a prosecution scenario. So I want you to think about those things when you think about those amendments in front of you. With that, I'll take any questions on the bill, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Are there any questions for the good chairman? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Chairman Olson. So I guess I just want your thoughts on why you chose to limit it mostly for the blood relatives or the person's immediate family, and then the 2-person limit. So in my district, we have lots of people who are unrelated to each other that live in the same household. And so my biggest concern is, are we going to prevent people who are unrelated living in the same household from delivering that household's ballots altogether? So for example, we have 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. You could have up to 5 to 6 people in that house, all unrelated, right? So they're like boyfriend, girlfriend, they're not married, etc. Would it be bad to keep them from turning in all their ballots in the same household? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Olson.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Yin, those are really good questions, and those are policy decisions in working through the bill and determining what are the actual parameters. I mean, the goal of the bill is it's to accomplish 2 things. It's one, to clarify what can occur, because that's not really clear in statute. And so if what we're clarifying is 2 ballots, 4 ballots, 6 ballots, I think that's a policy choice. In looking at the other 9 states that limit ballots, 2 seemed like a reasonable number. If you think that that's an unreasonable number based on your scenario, then I think that's a policy decision to say, well, if we limit it to 4, we're more likely to allow that micro level ballots harvesting. So again, I want to be very clear, at least my intent with bringing this bill is to clarify what I consider micro ballot harvesting. We want that to be available to the voter. That's the scenario you propose, where in the household, they're collecting ballots for, maybe the elderly who can't get out, or because of sickness or illness or whatever's occurring. This bill is intended to clarify that. I think you're going to have to wrestle with that individually. I'm still comfortable with 2. I think 2 captures most scenarios. But if you were to say it should be limited to 4 ballots, I don't think I would have any extreme heartburn, and that would probably capture even many more of those scenarios. And in terms of limiting it to blood relative, it's just consistent with what the 31 states do. It's very common amongst the states to limit it in that fashion.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Representative Olson, so just help me walk through the mail concept. So obviously, when you go and you either request a absentee ballot or you go and pick up an absentee ballot from our clerks, you then fill it out. The mail-in process, is there any sideboards on that mail-in process, or is that kind of, because obviously we're saying you can only do 2 or up to 2 and it has to be a blood relative, or how do we actually get that designated and we don't know who's actually doing the mailing?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Haroldson, that's a great question. I mean, somebody in theory, right, could collect 10 ballots and drop them in the mail. If somebody else saw that, or it came to their knowledge at some point, that's where you would turn that over to a sheriff for investigation. That person would be questioned. Presumably, if they did collect 10 ballots and put them in the mail, it would come down to a question of facts. What type of facts and evidence exists to support? I think that one's probably going to be a pretty hard one to prove. But when we're talking about ballot harvesting, what we're not necessarily trying to capture is that person who grabbed 4 or 5 ballots out of their household and put them in. We're really, someone who's got a bag full of ballots, right? And goes down to the post office with them. Then I think just in terms of how that would play out, at least my lawyer brain says, well, a prosecutor would subpoena the post office personnel as a witness and would simply say, hey, did you see this person come in with a giant bag of ballots? Yes. Did you see this person come in with 10 ballots? Yeah, actually, or no, I don't remember that. Those are facts that have to play out in an investigation. I don't know what type. I wrestled with that myself in terms of how could we in the bill place greater parameters on it. I suppose you could eliminate mail as an option. And just the same concern exists with the ballot drop box. There's unless somebody witnesses somebody carrying a box full of ballots, or the camera outside the courthouse catches somebody walking up with a box, there's no way, really to put sideboards on that. So again, I'd leave that up to, that's a policy choice. If you wanted to eliminate mail in the drop box from the bill in order to tighten it, I certainly don't have heartburn for that. Again, when I drafted this bill, I started moving forward with those 2 concepts. I want to clarify good ballot harvesting when we do want it to occur, and I want to try to limit bad ballot harvesting, and we still probably have to strike the balance.
Follow up? Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. So my question is, many of people that vote in my community live in assisted living or long-term care. They don't have immediate family in their household. And so and they probably can't themselves get to a drop box or get to the clerks. Maybe they can drop it in the mail, maybe they can't. And so I'm wondering where it puts those folks that are living in a different situation than an immediate family.
Chairman Olson?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Representative Newsom, I too have an assisted living facility in my district. The number of registered voters in there, I thought about it from my perspective in my district. The number of registered voters there are pretty limited. It's less than a dozen. And when I thought about that scenario, I thought, well, they would be able to put it in the mail, or they would designate a nurse, and one nurse would be able to take up to 2 ballots. So as long as there were 6 employees there, those 12 people would be covered. So that's kind of the more, I guess, conservative approach to it. The more liberal approach, and I don't mean that on a political spectrum, I just mean it in the sense of opening ballot harvesting up, would be what some states do. Some states have an assisted living or nursing home exemption, where if you are an employee of however you define that, a nursing home or an assisted living, then you can have, some states might limit it on the number of ballots they can collect, or they might just exempt them out. So it's something to consider. I did consider that, and I did walk through that. And again, I thought of the assisted living home in my district and how it's really not that many voters. So I don't think it would be terribly burdensome for them to figure it out. But if you've got 40, 50 registered voters in a nursing home, I agree that could be a problem. And I'm not opposed to an amendment that addresses that.
Follow up? Any other questions? Okay, with that, we will open it up. And are there any representatives or senators here to speak on this issue? Okay, any agencies? Secretary of State, Governor's Office?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Am I good to go?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and then we have Joel Rubino to my left, our General Counsel Policy Director, and to my right is our Chief Deputy, Jesse Naiman, who have been very helpful in unpacking the legal questions in this bill because there is a lot to unpack here. First, I want to say that I stand in total support of banning ballot harvesting, a statutory improvement, which would be a statutory improvement in Wyoming. Permitting ballot harvesting allows political operatives to collect and deliver an unlimited number of absentee ballots for tabulation with no time or quantity restriction. It further encourages gamesmanship and incentivizes coercion or manipulation of qualified electors by third parties intent on driving up favorable votes through the process of this collection, sometimes on a massive scale. But as with anything, I mean, it gets to the language in the bill, and that's where we do have some things we would like clarification on, and a couple things we would like to be fixed. For one, the bill has the first reference in Wyoming statute to ballot drop boxes as a means of absentee voting, the first statutory reference. And a key priority of mine is to end the use of ballot drop boxes, a position which is only strengthened by the increased security risks posed by ballot drop boxes around the country. Whether we like it or not, Wyoming's populace justifiably remains concerned about the use and security of ballot drop boxes. I believe taking the unprecedented step of codifying this language in Wyoming statute in a bill that in its title is about ballot harvesting is a severe miscalculation, which will serve to undermine Wyoming's confidence in our elections. So I have an amendment. So can you distribute Amendment 1? Thank you. What Amendment 1 does, and we're passing it out here, is it just reverts back to the current language and statute. It doesn't have this enumeration of possible delivery methods. It just goes back to allowing it to be delivered or mailed. And then the question is, what's the definition of that? But it just reverts it back to that original language, and you're not going to have this Romanet piecemeal designation of where you're going to have those deliveries occur. The other concern I have is this sort of approach where ballot harvesting is going to be allowed sometimes. And I think that, I go back to our previous Secretary of State, he used this line all the time, and I think it's a great line, is that voting requires a modicum of effort. It does. There's an effort that is there. And so we have a second amendment, which is basically based off the clerk's amendment, but in defining ballot harvesting, but it puts a period after the word workers. Could you distribute the second amendment? And it basically just doesn't allow third parties to distribute to ballot harvest, because that's what this bill, I'm glad on the catch title it says ballot harvesting, because it really isn't a ban on ballot harvesting. That isn't accurate. It's a clarification of when ballot harvesting is allowed. And we've researched, Alabama, Wisconsin, they've said, look, you need to turn in your ballot. And, the situation that Representative Newsom was talking about, that would be handled by mailing it in, which, assisted living has all sorts of boxes where, you just set the ballot and it's mailed in. But I think that just defining it this way, which is a modification of what the clerks are going to be putting forward, is a way to just address the issue and go down the line of saying we're not going to have harvested ballots in Wyoming, and also that it's going to be a felony, which is the other thing that the clerk's amendment does, which the bill currently does not, as the chairman kind of read. Where this would fit in, it would be a misdemeanor, and I do think it would rise to a felony level, in my opinion. That's the second part of the clerk's amendment, which I think is very positive. In terms of the complaint process, that's already laid out in state statute, and I'm not wedded to that complaint process in the clerk's amendment. I would ask if you do put that in there to add in SOS. I think there's already that discretion there in the statute for me to refer, for the office to refer complaints. But I think in terms of the clerk's amendment, that second half there does move it into the felony designation. And our amendment does that as well, the second one we just handed out. And we just tweaked the definition, which is the first half of the clerk's amendment, to say, look, we're not going to have a third-party designation. A third approach, which we just did not write up, and I'm not saying, I was thinking about this blood relative or person that you're related to, and you could define it to spouse, is you could put a limit maybe of 2 within a spousal or blood relationship. And so you would allow someone in a familial situation to turn in a ballot, but other than that, there would be no ballot harvesting. The bill is currently drafted, goes in a different direction. It says basically you can do an unlimited number of ballot harvests for blood relations, which gets into the point of how are you going to know? I mean, they could just say, well, I'm a blood relative, here's 40 ballots. Obviously, the eyes are going to probably roll a little bit, but what happens then? But I think then it has that 2 limit on outside folks. So I was thinking maybe you reverse that. You have a 2 limit on blood relations or spousal relations, and then none on outside folks. And you define it with that definition. It's the modification of the clerk's definition. There are a lot of options here. We want to get this right. The current bill draft has some big problems, and I think we could get it right in this session, but we got a ways to go. And at the very least, we really do need that First Amendment. I think the codification of Dropbox is a really, really bad message and statutory change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any questions from the committee? Representative Newsom.
So knowing that you're new into your office, and I wonder if you have any documentation from the prior Secretary of State that there was a complaint or a number of complaints about ballot harvesting in the state of Wyoming? Or maybe that'll go to the clerks when they testify as well. But has this been a problem that has been brought forward, not on the campaign trail, but actual complaints to the Secretary of State's office in the last 4 years?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, currently we have a public records request active on all of our complaints. So we've been reviewing that. The reality is I think many people would not submit a complaint because the current statute is very vague. So there's, the question is what's the substance of the complaint? Because the statute doesn't provide clarity on what is allowed and what isn't. I do think there's some room for further clarity on what the current statute allows, but and what it does not. But there's a repository from January to October, and I haven't gone through every single one. We're about to send that over to the folks that have requested that public records request.
Follow up.
Yeah, so there hasn't been some overwhelming problem that you've seen that would warrant this sort of bill? There hasn't been complaints at all, or that you're aware of?
Secretary Gray.
Mr. Chairman, I not that I haven't reviewed the whole repository, but I think a lot of these changes or improvements that it's about improvement. And now in preventing something in the future, a lot of these changes. Now, I'm not saying I'd put that in this sector. It's difficult to know how much is occurring. And I am careful. I take a conservative approach. Just because you don't have proof doesn't mean nothing is happening. It was like on the voter ID discussion. It was fascinating to me. They said, well, what's the problem? How do you know there's not voter impersonation? Well, if there's no voter ID law, how are you going to know there's not voter impersonation? I mean, it's kind of a circular argument, right? But on this, I want to get it right. So we might actually, if we can't get this language right, I have issues with the bill as currently drafted. So I'm, you know, I think you're taking a different angle on your issues, but I have issues too, because the bill isn't quite there in my opinion. But I think it would be somewhat proactive, but I can't tell you there hasn't been a single case of ballot harvesting in our state. And I don't think anyone could say that. And I object a little bit. People that say, well, there's no complaints. Well, that doesn't mean there isn't an issue. All the time, illegal activity occurs without a complaint. But I understand your question.
Any other questions? I just had one. So the bringer of the bill, somebody talked about both Dropbox and then mail in, and they said that they would be amicable to possibly taking those two off. Do you have a comment on? I heard your comment on the Dropboxes, but what is your comment on mailed-in ballots?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the First Amendment would just revert back to the original language, which allows mailed in or delivery. The question is, what does delivery mean? And that's been a long discussion, but we just revert back to the original language. In my opinion, starting to enumerate it is a whole other bill. And I just think if we're going to deal with ballot harvesting, let's go back to the old language on what delivery is. Delivery is allowed and mail's allowed, and then deal with this ballot harvesting issue, which is tough enough in terms of getting the language right on, and the policy choices as to, are you going to allow any? Who are you going to allow to do it? And let's just go back to the original language of 229113 on delivery and mail being acceptable means of submitting your ballot. So that's what the First Amendment does. You pass the Second Amendment, that does what the First Amendment does as part of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is basically a blanket moving in the direction of no third-party submission, no ballot harvesting, which is what Wisconsin and Alabama have. There are states that do this, and that's where I fall on this sector. I mean, I just think having, and then I talked conceptually about maybe having an exemption for spouse and blood relative. I mean, this whole thing about blood relative, you could just write in spouse in the definition of a blood relative, but I get nervous. I think then you limit that to two, because then it's the clerk's point. How are they going to police this? Someone comes in with 40 ballots, say it's for all my blood relatives. I've come from a big family. And, there's no way to police that. So I'd say you go the opposite way if you want to go that direction and put a limit on the number that blood relatives can submit and not allow any third-party designee. That's a third conceptual approach.
Okay, any other questions? If not, thank you.
Thanks.
Call up the Clerks Association. Do you have comment on this?
Mr. Vice Chairman, we have Malcolm Irvin on the line too, on the virtual room.
Go ahead and state your name for the record and your association.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. At the table with me today, I have the Honorable Deborah Lee, who is the Laramie County Clerk. I believe we have on line Malcolm Irvin, who is the Platte County Clerk, as well as the president of the association, and he'd be here if the roads weren't closed. And possibly, I believe we also will have Julie Fries from Fremont County. So thank you very much. I have lots of papers here, sir. I have a number of amendments.
Okay, go ahead with your comments.
My purpose today is to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections, and particularly on ballot harvesting. I'm sorry. I'll get my tongue straight here. Wyoming elections have integrity and are well run due to the dedication of 23 county clerks and their staff, with hundreds of committed volunteers and the support of state and local elected officials. There is no evidence of ballot harvesting in Wyoming. And as well, we have issues as well. The clerks have had the opportunity to review this proposed legislation and would like to offer and discuss an amendment for your consideration. And Mr. Chairman, I believe that Chairman Olson has pretty well covered our amendment. You have a copy of our amendment. And the first topic here is the blood relative. Using the term blood relative eliminates stepchildren and adopted children. Further, we are concerned that how we would prove someone was a blood relative, we would have to take their word for it. An additional concern we have is the task of tracking who brings what ballots, especially if ballots are dropped on a counter before we're able to get delivering an individual's name. So we have some concern about that. But the topic of blood relative is a concern of ours, and that's been discussed very well here, and will be a policy decision, I'm sure, on your part. In 2021, our association worked to develop a definition of ballot harvesting, which is in part of the suggested amendment. We also utilized existing language in the election code on how our offices proceed with investigations of potential wrongdoing. And in our amendment, again, you have that in front of you. It talks, the definition that was presented is ballot harvesting means the solicitation, gathering, and returning of completed absentee ballots by third-party individuals, volunteers, or workers when not approached to do so directly by a voter and provided with the voter's expressed authorization. We'd appreciate your consideration of that. We'd also like to discuss drop boxes. And I'd like to drop boxes have been successfully used in counties for county business at courthouses for 8 to 10 years. That's for the delivery of tax payments, registration payments for other business to the courthouse. Drop boxes are pretty common practice in a lot of counties. We have also been used for elections for several election seasons. And in 2022, 7 counties used drop boxes. The permission was given in 2020 by a directive from Secretary Buchanan to have a drop box at or near your office or courthouse to accommodate voters who do not wish to personally hand deliver or their absentee ballot to you. If in your judgment, you do not wish to have the public personally hand delivering their absentee ballots to your staff. Near means at or in close proximity to the physical office, which would be a hallway on the outside of the building, parking lot, or driveway of the county clerk. Yes, this was during COVID. However, drop boxes have proved to be popular due to them being convenient and more efficient than the Postal Service. Security requirements that were placed on our drop boxes at that point in time with that directive, some considerations that were taken into account when implementing the drop box were to include the location, the security, visibility, accessibility, availability of video surveillance, parking and drive-through options. Ballot drop boxes can be indoor, outdoor, limited to business hours, or unstaffed with 24-hour access. All boxes require significant security features, including durable construction and locks and seals that will prevent tampering. However, a 24-hour unstaffed drop box must be permanently cemented to the ground and under video surveillance. Ballots from all drop boxes must be collected daily. When ballots are removed, appropriate records for documenting and tracking the transportation of ballots must be kept, and election judges staffing with access to the ballot drop boxes must be from different political parties. And that was the basis of the requirements and that were set by county clerks on how they manage their drop boxes. Some of our clerks have stricter requirements than that, as well as these boxes, again, are still being used for other county business to drop off your taxes and deliver documents and those types of things. County clerks are familiar with the needs of their citizens, and the use of drop boxes are different in every county. The use of a drop box should continue to be a local option at the discretion of the county clerk, and we would appreciate your favorable consideration of that. And I don't know, Clerk Lee may have a few comments to make. Laramie County uses a drop box in their county, and she would have some statistics that you might find interesting.
Thank you. Since we do have the clerks together, let's go ahead and take your comments too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in Laramie County, which is, of course, the largest county in Wyoming, we've used a drop box for 5 elections, beginning in 2020. And I will take the most recent general election for my data. So nearly 4,500 voters voted in last year's general election by absentee ballot. That's roughly 15%. And of those, 75% of those who requested an absentee ballot were over the age of 59. And of those nearly 4,500 voters, 36% were 78 and over. So we do have many seniors that do avail themselves of the opportunity to vote by absentee ballot. Of the absentee ballots returned by voters, 30% came to us via the drop box. And a similar data held for the primary election as well. Roughly 30% or more came to us by the drop box. Voters who returned their ballots were primarily Republican, which is a reflection of our voter registration. A number of voters were from outside the Cheyenne area, primarily eastern Laramie County. Most returned their ballots in the few days prior to the election, when it would have been impossible for those ballots to have arrived at our office through the mail system. I will note that each election I see ballots returned by mail arrive in our office after the statutory deadline by which they may be counted. Postmarks often reveal that those ballots were mailed well in advance of the deadline. Some are erroneously sent to other states or other places in Wyoming and arrive in our office days, weeks, or sometimes months and months later. Mary Langford has described our security measures and the security of the receptacle itself. The drop box not only provides voters with the assurance that their ballot is timely delivered, it also gives them the peace of mind that their signature and other personal information will not be seen by third parties outside of the clerk's office. Timely arrival of ballots also gives our office time to contact any voters who may have forgotten to sign the affidavit on the ballot envelope. The drop box allows our voters to be independent. My 94-year-old parents, and I wish they could be here today to testify, they appreciate being able to place their ballots in the drop box at a time when they don't have to come into the building or to find a parking place around it. Dropbox is a secure receptacle, and short of delivering the ballot to the clerk's office during business hours, it is the most reliable and secure method. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Clerk Urban, can you hear me?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any comments you want to add?
I would like to just clarify a couple of things. Mr. Chairman, my name is Malcolm Irvin. I'm the Platte County Clerk, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join you virtually. I assure you I would be there, but this may surprise you. Wyoming Wind had a different plan for me, so I appreciate being able to join this way. I want to clarify one thing Mary said about Secretary Buchanan's directive in 2020. That directive didn't give us permission to use drop boxes, but it did provide us some very valuable guidance on how to use them and established some more thorough security measures. And so, Mr. Chairman, as Mary said, some of our clerks have used them for 8 to 10 years. So we believe that if you did take Secretary Gray's first proposed amendment and reverted 229113 to its original language, we would still interpret that to allow Dropbox as a delivery method. So we wouldn't have a problem with that amendment. Mr. Chairman, I just want to talk briefly about our proposed amendment. And really our approach was, what is the voter comfortable with? If the voter is not comfortable putting the ballot in the mail, fine. If the voter is not comfortable putting it in a Dropbox, that's fine too. But if the voter is comfortable with asking somebody at the nursing home or in their household to return the ballot for them, okay. But this provided us the ability to first off define ballot harvesting. I think that's been an issue for us is, to us, ballot harvesting is somebody obtaining a ballot that they weren't supposed to. Others, and we've heard that today, believe that anytime somebody other than the voter is in contact with the ballot, that's ballot harvesting. So we think that this amendment first off defines what is it. And then second off, if the voter has a concern that somebody returned a ballot on their behalf that they didn't request, it provides for similar language for investigations that we have in registration offenses. And we understand Chairman Olson's explanation, and we would agree that we would still have some ability to investigate and have some penalties. But Mr. Chairman, most importantly with this proposed amendment is to define what is ballot harvesting. Mr. Chairman, that really is just the clarification. We really just wish to define it. Our other concerns with the bill as is, like Secretary Gray said, it's difficult to police it. If somebody walks in and says, these ballots are being delivered, I'm their blood relative, we have no way of disproving that. And so, Mr. Chairman, we know that we will be tested on that. We will have people try to poke holes in that approach. And so we believe that by putting it in the voter's hand, it really allows the voter to be responsible for their ballot returning to our offices. And so, Mr. Chairman, for those reasons, that's why we submitted our amendment. And I appreciate the opportunity to offer comments.
Thank you, Mr. Urban. Questions for either the two clerks or the association chair, or Representative Ian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Ms. Langford, if you know, or either of the clerks, so on page 2, the definition of immediate family is an existing definition that has been edited. I didn't really think about this when Chairman Olson was on the stand, but do you know where that definition is being used in existing language? I do know that it's been used at least one place, so I just want to understand what the other side effects are of replacing person with blood relative.
Clerks?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yan, I have to admit, I don't know where that is anywhere else.
Mr. Chairman, this is Julie Freeze, Fremont County Clerk. I believe that might be in the section for contributions that you can receive them from the immediate family. That's my off the top of my head guess on that.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to negate you from the conversation. I didn't see your face on the screen, so I forgot you were there.
Sorry, I still don't have a face. One day I will.
Any other questions from the committee? Representative Newsom.
A question or maybe a comment. It seems like what we're trying to get to here is to avoid ballot tampering. That seems what we're trying to avoid. And the thought is that if somebody brings 5 or 10 or 40 ballots, that there's the possibility of tampering with those ballots. And so I'm wondering about the process. So when an absentee ballot comes back to your office, I'm sure that maybe I'm not sure. I imagine that you go through that to make sure that that ballot was not tampered with. No matter if I bring mine, my husband's, or 20 of my best friends' ballots, your concern is that there was no tampering with those ballots, less concern about who brought those ballots to the clerk's office or put them in the mail or that sort of thing. So I think as we look at this, is ballot harvesting a bad thing? Ballot tampering is a bad thing. And so I'm struggling here with, if somebody brings however many ballots and none of them are tampered with, we seem to have done our job. You all seem to have done your job. So I'm a little conflicted here with saying, I'm supposed to bring 2, but if I bring 5, that means I'm a bad person and I've committed a felony. Although those ballots are signed, sealed, delivered, I'm just struggling with that, if you can help me out.
Ms. Langford, is Sandy a bad person?
Mr. Chairman, no, she's not. Representative Newsom, when a absentee ballot is delivered to the county clerk, the back of the envelope is reviewed because there's a signature that's required and a date. And a lot of clerks, I think it's standard practice that if a signature isn't in place or that type of thing, they will try to cure that if they have time to be able to do that, contacting it, running down the hall, or if it's a phone call or those kinds of things, because without those signatures, those ballots don't count. And that's basically the look for the tamper that is in place. Once also that's seen to be okay, then the WildReg system, which manages, the voter registration and everything else, that absentee ballot is checked into there to say that, yes, it went out, it's been returned, and then it's secured. As far as really any looking for tampering, yeah, if it's got a bite out of it or if it's torn or damaged or those kinds of things, but not really. If you had 5 or 10 ballots that all had the same handwriting signature on them, then that might trip your interest. But I don't think, at least in my experience, I never had boxes of ballots show up. A couple, oh, here I am, my kids, mine and my kids, that kind of thing.
Follow up? Any other questions?
Mr. Vice Chairman,
Chairman Olson?
just that I think I approach this legislation the same as the clerks do, with the statement that there's no evidence in Wyoming of ballot harvesting. I believe that to be true myself as well. It's just the bill is trying to be proactive where ballot harvesting does occur in other states and has occurred. And I don't know that it's so much of a tampering fear as an influenced fear is really what it is when it occurs in other states. I don't know if you have experience with understanding what's happened in some of the other states, but a mobile van might be set up and invite voters to the van. And then the question is, when they have 50 ballots, did they influence the voter when the voter was filling out those ballots? There's a lot of questions surrounding, why do you have a box full of ballots? Granted, that hasn't happened in Wyoming, but I believe that's the point of the bill. But also to clarify, when you do have an immediate family member or other designee that could drop off the ballots for you, do you have any experience with? I want to talk about the nursing home example. Do you have any experience with that? Because that would be a scenario where they might bring in 10 ballots, or a nurse might bring in 10 ballots.
Clerks?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Olson, nursing homes are worrisome because a lot of times they will come in and get absentee ballots for residents that are in the home. You don't know if they're actually secretly casting those ballots, or if they're all sitting in the dining room and deciding who they're going to vote for and those kinds of things, as well as how they get back, because they don't have easy ways to get the ballots back to the clerk's office. In my experience, again, I've encouraged those folks, they have mail service at nursing homes, mail the ballots back. Or if there's a person that, in your bill where you could designate someone at the nursing home to be the person to return it to the safe place that it needs to go. But yeah, nursing homes, those group living situations are worrisome because you don't know really what's going on.
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, this is Julie Fries, Fremont County Clerk. I have 3 nursing homes in my county, and we used to go out with one representative from each party. But I felt like the day that we were there and the time that we're there, some people were good to vote that day and some weren't. And so we turned that over to the they could give us the request forms from each of those people, but then the ballot goes when their family's there to vote it. So ours comes back in the mail. Most of those, we don't have any of those drop off. And I do think it's a better situation. We're getting less and less because I think more and more people realize at these nursing homes that it should be a family-oriented thing as to whether they should be able to vote or not. I wondered if I could go over a couple of other things that you have brought up. So first of all, I think one of the panel members had said the same thing, but you know, people will figure this out that, oh, I can't drop off a whole bunch of them, so I'll just throw a bunch in the mail. And I think that that could be, I mean, if people really are ballot harvesting, they probably are doing that because they know they're not going to get caught. I like the idea that we have a definition that ballot harvesting is a crime. And if we suspect that, then we would turn that over and get that investigated, and maybe that would go that direction. As far as the drop boxes, I've had one for a number of years before the 2020. And I started this year, my security system is pretty robust, and I can actually, there's a warning, you can only be there 45 seconds. And then and most people get the warning that says you stayed too long, or I can talk to them through there if they're messing with the box or whatever. And I started running reports and counting how many cars, and I matched up not people necessarily, but numbers. And a large amount in my county are oil field workers or work out of town. I'm a large county, a lot of distance to drive, but they'll drive from Dubois instead of try to trust the mail to make sure they put it in the drop box. I also added a phone number that you could call about any absentee ballot to make sure that they got here. And with me saying all of that, yeah, that's what I did. But we have been working on a lot of uniformity stuff in the Clerks Association. And I do believe this was one area that we talked about that we might be looking at how we can maybe make some uniform procedures across the state so that people understand how important it is to have their ballots be their ballots and take care of them. But I'm just wondering if the definition that it's a crime at this point does still send a message that it shouldn't happen. And since we're not sending out ballots to people that have not asked for them, these are people who have asked for them. And if they don't get them, trust me, they call and go, why is my ballot not here? Why did I not get it? Or in my case, if they called and said, why is my ballot here? And I say, no, it's not, then we start looking for remedies there. So those are just some things that I wanted to add to the other testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just had one. It's just a quick chain of custody question. So on a mail-in or a Dropbox ballot, when do you open it and does the envelope stay with the ballot? Or do you purge the envelope and count the ballot?
So, Mr. Chairman, when the ballot is taken from the drop box, it's checked in through the WireReg system. So it's checked in so that we know that it's back. And then it is secured. And then during the time that you can process absentee ballots, which there was some change to the law last year where they can start processing on Thursday before, or if they don't, if they do it on election day or whatever, that's when the envelope is opened and the ballot is separated from the envelope and put into the tabulator.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Other members of the public? Hello. Ms. Lowe, can you identify yourself?
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chairman and esteemed committee members. My name is Jen Lowe. I am the Executive Director at the Equality State Policy Center, a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to fair elections and transparent government right here in the Equality State. I would like to say that ESPC has no position on this bill, but I would like to take the opportunity to provide some comments. Our elections are safe and secure. You have heard me say that, and I will say it again. It is a testament to our county clerks and our Secretary of State's office that 94% of Wyomingites felt confident that their vote would be counted correctly in the 2022 election. Also like to point out that nationwide confidence in election integrity has actually ticked up from its lows in 2008 and 2020. I know there's still work to do, but it is not at all-time lows. Also would like to let you know that election integrity is directly correlated to the success or failure of one's preferred candidate in an election. 7 out of 23 counties allowed drop boxes. I have not seen the amendment that has been presented to you, but I am guessing that it has to do with drop boxes. It is a local control issue. And as you've heard from previous testifiers, it is the most safe and secure way to drop off a ballot. There have been no reports of ballot harvesting in the state of Wyoming. There have been media reports of ballot harvesting happening in other states. Also films that indicate, especially in dense urban areas, ballot harvesting is something that occurs. Drop boxes make it easier for rural community members to drop off their ballot when they're in town versus waiting till election day to drive in. Nursing homes have been mentioned, but what about also domestic abuse shelters and women's shelters where women can't leave? Again, drop boxes are a local option that are safe and secure. I also want to just leave with this, a cautionary tale about legislation. Unintended consequences come up. And we are passing so many election bills this year, and we have seen so many that we have to understand there will be unintended consequences of these legislation, and that those are going to fall on the voters, on the clerks, and on the election poll workers. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Are there any other members of the public to testify in the room? Welcome. Please state your name.
Thank you very much, committee. Chairman, my name is Tom Laycock. I'm with AARP Wyoming. We do not yet own one of those voting vans that was being talked about earlier, but maybe someday. So the reason that I came up, I wanted to make a couple asks. First of all, older adults make up the highest proportion of voters in the state of Wyoming. 167,000 of the 277,000 in the 2020 election, age 50 and over. We actually see that the amount of people that vote, the voting age, how am I say this? So the voting age percentage, in other words, the people that can vote in that age band versus those that do, highest in age 70 to 79, then 60 to 69. And then we see it taper off at 80. Part of that is an issue of just being able to get there physically. And so I appreciate the idea, the concepts around whether or not a nursing home is, maybe has some other carve-outs for that. We do know that nursing homes, when possible, do, get the van, to get the bus going, and election day is a big deal for people to go in and actually do it in person. But there are some that just physically can't. So we would appreciate maybe opening that up a little bit to more folks to be able to bring in more than 2 ballots, if that's an instance of that there. So that would be, I think that's most of my testimony for today. Be happy to stand for any questions. But our big ask is just don't make it any tougher for older Americans to vote. The ballot boxes have been very popular amongst our members, and they've asked us to try to keep those around as well.
Thank you. Questions? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Laycock. If we change the immediate family definition back to the original where it said person living in the individual's household, do you think it would provide the necessary flexibility to allow a nursing home or some member who's in that nursing home to deliver ballots for the rest of the people in the nursing home?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that gets you there. I think going back to the designee concept may get you there, but obviously CNAs, RNs who work in that facility don't live there, and so I think that kind of gets you kind of stuck within that definition.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Gail, would you state your name for the record?
Gail Simmons from Civics 307. The fundamental right to vote should not be restricted, diminished, or constrained without valid and documented indication of abuse, risk, or illegal behavior. It is one of the absolute most critical rights that we are provided under our Constitution, and anything that is done to diminish that must be very cautiously approached and be no more than is necessary to counter the risk of it occurring. I would like to say on group homes, if there was language that was put in here that indicates maybe provided the collection of mail used in the facility for all other correspondence is used. So if in a group home, regular mail is collected and somebody takes it to the post office, and that is the same process that's used for voting, then that should be okay. Putting in a special one would be different. I'm having a concern about modicum of effort because I'm concerned that being homebound or other restricted in movement justifies loss of individual voting rights. And then finally, I was in the Six Sigma process improvement at GE Healthcare, which is renowned worldwide for statistical process control. And one of our basic tenets on that I keep coming back to on facts, not fear, is that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So I am fine with defining what harvesting is, and I agree through you, Chairman Napper Olson, that tampering rather than harvesting is probably the issue. So the clerks wanting to have a codified definition in order for them to continue their outstanding work of ensuring our election integrity, I will stand behind that. And I stand for questions.
Questions?
Yeah.
Chairman Olson?
Yeah, is there any, I mean, defining ballot harvesting, making it a crime, is there anything squiggly wiggly about someone approaching the clerk's office with a box of 50 ballots? That I know that hasn't happened in Wyoming, but sometimes law is about being proactive. Is that not a concern that we should have?
Simmons?
Through you, Chairman. I'm not going to advocate that there be no restriction. I think that the point was made previously about the fact that it's not defined and that it is defined in others. What that level is, I think, is the question. So I think that's something you have to wrestle with. And there should be some reasonable amount of that. But what is it? And does it allow for the fact that our process really helps us identify when there's tampering? So consider group homes, whether it is a large nursing facility or an in-home where there's 6 or 7, or as was pointed out, the women's shelters. Consider those and make sure you're providing for them. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else to testify? Please approach and identify yourself.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I support the bill, but I have some thoughts for you. The connotation of ballot harvesting always brings with it some negative pictures of some party guy Xeroxing off a bunch of ballots and distributing them and so on and so forth. I voted by absentee ballot for 25 years, active duty in the Navy. And in my observation, the ballots that I cast and mailed in were as secure as anything there could have been. I well remember the hanging Chad issue of a couple decades ago. Sublette County happened to use that method of ballots, and I kind of looked at that whole issue and said, what's going on here? We just heard the word about right to vote, and I got that. But I also note that you might consider the fact that rights bring with them responsibilities. And I know when I cast my absentee ballots, I looked at the envelopes and other things and made sure I followed and signed and so on and so forth. Your core issue is really, as Representative Newsom mentioned, is what's the issue of influencing and tampering of ballots? You know, I can't see myself having an issue with a county clerk having a drop box that's outside the office and that she holds the key to, she or he holds the key to, you know. The other thing is, what do you do when you have something brought up, I believe it was Representative Yin, about you have this house like a bunch of college students and they say, hey, Joe, will you take my ballot down to the mail? And he gathers up 10 or 20 and, you know, should that guy have been guilty of something? And so that issue of who can carry, blood relative, family member, et cetera, is something to be worked on. It may take you a while to kind of get comfortable with it. But the core issue is influence and tampering. Did somebody really cast a ballot that the county clerk printed up? And so on and so forth. And I don't have good, easy answer for you. It's a tough issue, and that's why Chairman Olson is trying to figure it out. I support the idea of getting to it, and subject to any questions, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else here to testify in the room? Is there anybody online? Okay, who's?
Laura Pearson has her hand raised.
Okay, we let her in. Ms. Pearson, go ahead with your comments. Can you hear us?
She should be there now.
Ms. Pearson?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead with your comments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. First of all, I want to point out that I live in the middle of nowhere. 20 miles from one town, 20 miles from where I'm supposed to vote, 60 miles from where I work. My dad is 83 years old, and we're all able to figure out how to get our ballots mailed if we vote absentee or get into our election precinct to vote. So what I want to ask you is, did you not see the footage of people ballot harvesting in several other states in 2020 and 2022? How are you planning to police this? Because even though there are cameras at the drop boxes, how do you definitively know that the multiple ballots dropped in the box are a blood relative or immediate family member of the deliverer? COVID is over. Drop boxes for voting need to be eliminated, in my opinion. Regardless if this is happening in Wyoming or not, what's to say that it won't happen? You have to understand that in other states, ballot harvesters were paid by big money. What is wrong with showing up in person or mailing your ballot? Are we really going to rely on whistleblowers? In my opinion, any harvested ballot disenfranchises the vote. We, your constituents, elected Chuck Gray largely on his promises of election integrity. We need to trust his opinion and applaud his efforts and his dedication in testifying on all of the bills that could directly affect his office and the promises he made to his constituents. I'm asking for a no vote on this bill. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you. Any questions? All right. Is there anybody else online? Okay, with that, what is the pleasure of the committee? Oh, with that, I will close testimony. Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask the clerks, come back up again, just real quick, just for a quick question?
Yes, go ahead with your
Thank
question.
you, Mr. Chairman, and I was next door presenting a bill, so I had to step out for a little bit, and we were just kind of getting into drop boxes when you left, and I'm looking at your amendment. And then we heard testimony, I heard 7 out of 23 counties. Can you just give us a little background, ballot drop boxes? Where are they are they inside or outside? They have surveillance, cameras on them. Do we need to write that in there? Just give us a little, I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet about it, but what's actually happening in Wyoming? And just educate us a little bit. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, I've asked Deborah Lee to join me. She's a secretary, or she's a clerk in Laramie County, and they utilize a Dropbox there. Dropboxes are in courthouses, they're outside. There can be one, they're under camera, they're under lights. We had the clerk from Fremont County, Julie Fries, testify that hers are recorded. They are told they only can have 45 seconds at the box, and she can talk to people that are at the Dropbox. Ballots are retrieved from the Dropbox at least once a day. I'm sure that they do that more often, especially when it gets busy and you're in Laramie County and the box gets full. But I think Deborah probably can speak to that better. She's administered a Dropbox. And they're in small counties as well as big counties.
Representative Harshman.
Just before Clerk Lee, just what counties have them just for our education? Have you guys already talked to all this? I'm so sorry.
Well, not what counties.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, there were 7 in the last, and let me see if I can do this off the top of my head. Laramie, Carbon, Fremont.
Converse and Albany.
Oh, Converse and Albany. And Natrona, yep. Yep, it's inside, yep. Park County has used them too, yep. Yep, oh, yep. So yeah, there's Teton County, yep. We're almost at 7 now with a lot of help.
Follow up.
And just that final question, sorry if I'm burning daylight here, but there is no requirement then in statute that they be under video surveillance or inside or under personal kind of supervision by an employee or those kind of things.
So, Mr. Chairman, the direction that was given was a directive from Secretary Buchanan in 2020 on how they would be secured, what the security requirements would be. And I read those off earlier. Security considerations need to be taken into account when implementing a Dropbox to include location, security, visibility, accessibility, ability of video surveillance, parking, and drive-through options. Dropboxes can be indoor, outdoor, limited to business hours, or unstaffed with 24-hour access. All boxes require significant security features, including durable construction and locks and seals that can prevent tampering. However, a 24-hour unstaffed ballot drop box must be permanently cemented into the ground and under video surveillance. Ballots from drop boxes must be collected daily. When ballots are removed, appropriate records for documenting and tracking the transportation of ballots must be kept. The election judges staffing with access to the ballot boxes must be from different political parties. And the counties I know have they have their management requirements that they've developed on how they manage their Dropbox, including all of these issues. And Deborah can speak to that, I think.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Clerk Lee.
Representative Harshman. Another thing we do is when we empty the Dropbox, we take those they're emptied into a secured container. They're brought into our office, and then we use the barcode scanner so we know which ballot was returned by which method. So in other words, it would say Jared Olson returned it through the Dropbox. We have the date, we have the time. So all that is recorded, it's monitored. If an anomaly were to occur, we would certainly look into that. If within the course of a period of time, for example, if all of a sudden many appeared, we would certainly look into that video surveillance and look into that.
Any other questions? And just as a follow-up, we did hear earlier testimony from Secretary Gray that drop boxes are nowhere in state statute. And I don't think even here we define it. So the concern is codifying something that is not in state statute. Okay, I will close public testimony now. What is the pleasure of the board?
It was moved by whom?
Moved by Wiley, seconded by Haroldson. Okay, let's go through the bill and then we'll have any amendments that come along the way here. Page 1. Page 2. Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would like to, on page 2, line 5, put back person and remove blood relative.
It's been moved and seconded on the amendment on line 5, page 2, to remove blood relative and replace that back with person. Is there any
Just a question on that amendment. Well, I guess you can go either way. I guess you could just delete the whole thing because you just don't need it in the bill.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Representative Yin, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so I mean, I assume that if we adopt this amendment, LSO to conform would just say delete lines 4 through 6 from the bill or whatever. But to explain the reasoning behind the amendment, I think it does help with, one, we don't create a side effect with the contribution limits that immediate family is already used in. So the definition of immediate family is already used in contribution limits. And so that would change that if we kept it, if we changed it to blood relative. And then 2, it helps with the situations where you have a bunch of people living together, and you can still have one person in that group of household. So it would help for some of the situations, and maybe some of the situations with a senior center or an assisted living home where someone in that home is able to make it, even if not everybody in the home is able to make it, or someone could drive one person who lives there to deliver it. It's not perfect by any means, but I think it helps a lot of situations.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Wiley.
Representative Yin, would you be against putting designated person into there instead of just person?
Mr. Chairman, no, I wouldn't. I mean, I guess there's still a concern of how that would affect the contribution limit portion if any designated person counts as immediate family, on whether that would be exempt from contribution limits. So that's the part of the statute where immediate family is used in, which becomes a concern. So, but I think we could change where immediate family is used in the bill, and that would probably help, or use the county clerk's amendment, which would also do the same thing.
Other comments, questions? Okay, let's vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Amendment carries. Any other amendments for page 2? Representative Haroldson was before Yin, or after Yin, so we'll go with his first.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. On page 2, line 16, sorry, line 13, the stricken language mailed or to be reinstated. And then after 16, do we want to do that as, I guess, its own amendment? I think they kind of go hand in hand. So then after, on 16, after section, we delete from there through the end of the page. And then on page 3, lines 1 and 2 as well. So we're basically just going back to the original conversation that the ballot shall be sealed in their inner ballot envelope and mailed or delivered to the county clerk by the qualified elector or designated person. And with saying that, it takes out the whole conversation about ballot drop boxes. It takes out the whole conversation about all of it, because at the end of the day, we have, did I confuse you? Okay, I'll come back.
Finish your thought, yeah.
Okay. But it isn't exactly. No, because I'm going to do some other things.
I'm confused by the amendment.
Take on page 2, line 13. Eliminate the strike through mail door. On page 2, line 16. After section comma, delete everything on the rest of that page. And then on page 3, delete line 1 and 2. You're welcome.
So you leave in line 14 and 15 up to designated person? Is that what you do?
Correct.
And then you put a period there, and then you're striking the rest of the language.
Yep.
From lines 15 through 22?
Nope.
You're leaving B and C?
I am leaving B and C at this point.
Okay.
Correct, ma'am.
Okay, do we have that straight? Okay, is there a second? Okay, moved by Representative Haroldson, second by Representative Ottman. All those is there any discussion on the amendment? Representative.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know. I think I'd look at it as friendly, but to eliminate all of 16 and then all of B and C and insert the county clerk suggested language. I just don't,
Let me ask this question. We still would want that to be B and C, right? Or are we adding it just as its full definition insertion? That was my only
but
question.
I'll wait. I won't confuse the issue. I
No,
think we just
I'm
vote
good
up
with
and
this.
down.
Okay,
amendment.
let's
I
stick
just-
with this amendment. If you have
Okay.
one to add, we'll add it on. But all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no?
No.
A show of hands. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye, or show your hand. Aye. Okay, all those opposed, no? Okay, motion carries. Any other amendment for page 2?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I would just continue some of that deletion, all of line 16, and then go over and delete B and C, really that's suggested by the clerks, and then insert this language so we have a definition of what ballot harvesting is, and then the felony offense with it. And that was distributed to us by the clerks.
Representative Yin.
Was it seconded first before?
Oh, do we have a second?
Okay.
Haroldson.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, what the clerk's language does actually upgrades ballot harvesting to a felony from just not using a designated person, which is in the language of what is allowed. So, right, if either the elector or a designated person doesn't do it, then it's a misdemeanor. But if we insert the language from the clerks with the definition in the felony offense, it upgrades that to a felony. And I don't know if that's something that I would feel comfortable with. I think even without that language, as Representative Chairman Olson said before, if it isn't delivered by a designated person, which is the language on line 15 on page 2, then it would still be a misdemeanor because you've delivered it from someone who harvested it because they weren't designated. They just took it from you and you never told them that they were allowed to do it.
Representative Wiley.
Wouldn't it be cleaner just to adopt the language from 22-102 that the clerk submitted to us to page 1 under A on 22-102 there, and take that definition there? And then my thoughts earlier was if we did designated person, then we could remove mail on line 19, page 2, and then remove lines 1 and 2 off of page 3, and then insert on line 15 or designated person. And then that could clean a lot of it up and not be so convoluted. Because then you could have a family member, so say if you're a serving in the military, you could have a family member take your ballot down to the county courthouse for you and submit it to the clerk.
Representative Wiley, that would change totally the amendment. So let's deal with the amendment that's on the table. Is there any other question on that? Which was striking line 16, correct, Steve? And then using the clerk's, eliminating B and C and inserting the clerk's definition.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. And if you take this out, I mean, it's already, you don't need it in there, I don't think. I don't think you need to spell out mail, hand delivery, or ballot box. I don't think any of it needs to be in statute. I think, and so I think the clerk's got this right. It's really about, you know, who the designated person is, and there's several paragraphs to that. I think our decision, another decision, not with this amendment, but I think the importance of this amendment actually defines what it is. But then I think also the next discussion, at least in my brain, is how many of these can a person deliver? Because if you eliminate C, I think we heard testimony, you know, nursing home 2 is probably not the right number. That could be a different amendment, or if we want to even talk about it. But I think this cleans it all up. I don't think you need the mail, the hand delivery, or the ballot drop box in there.
Is there any other comments or questions on the amendment?
I think Barb probably has a question on the amendment, because I think we just added to the amendment.
On 15, so you don't want the word in either, right? On page 2. You want it to end with requirements, period?
Subject to the requirements in subsections B and C of this section.
But you're eliminating B and C.
Exactly. So that's all deleted.
But he's putting back in the clerks B and C.
Period there.
I think your period has to go before subject to the requirements in subsection B and C.
So, Mr. Chairman, is the amendment, just to ask the bringer of the amendment, is the amendment just to adopt the rest of the clerk's proposed
To adopt,
amendment?
Mr. Chairman, it's to adopt the rest of the clerk's amendment. It's really what it does.
Okay.
Right here.
Yep, so it sounds like the amendment is just to adopt the clerk's amendment.
22-1-2-102.
The whole thing, because that clarifies the language on
Then
page
it's-
2, line 15 and 16.
Mr. Chairman, the
Does-
previous amendment took part of the clerks. This would do all of the clerks. Yeah.
Does that make
Thank you.
sense?
That's a good question.
Okay.
Does the second concur? Okay, is everybody clear on the amendment?
It's this right here.
It's basically adopting,
Mr. Chairman.
We already adopted the first half of this, or the first line of this amendment.
Mr. Chairman, and sorry, I was going to do that, but when we had an amendment that started adopting this amendment, so that's why I started to, that's why we created the cluster that we're standing in. So this is really all it is we are just now saying that we're going to take and adopt from, just to clarify, I'm hoping, from it'd be the third section down that says page 2, line 15 and 16, strike subject to the requirements all the way through the end of the clerk's amendment.
So do we need to get rid of the first amendments?
No, because the
Just do it
very
all as
first,
one lump?
the very first amendment is the top of the clerk's amendment, the very first section.
Okay.
Page 2, line 5, that was the first amendment. Now the second amendment is the rest of the clerk's amendment. So the two amendments together are the
Are
clerk's
equal.
amendment.
it's not much harder when I help.
So I can attach the entire clerk's amendment to this, and it just does it up in a nice ball.
Yep.
If this passes.
Okay, so is everybody clear on the amendment we're voting on?
Yes.
So
Representative Newsom?
I have a question about, it appears as though we delete all of this and go with this definition and go with a felony offense. My question is, on page 2, line 13. At 12 and 13, the ballot shall then be sealed in the inner ballot envelope and mailed to or delivered to the county clerk by a qualified elector or designated person.
Period, yes.
So my question is, does delivered to a county clerk mean that somebody can drop it in a Dropbox?
I would say so.
So using a Dropbox is considered delivered to the county clerk?
Any other comments or questions? Okay, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Motion carries. Are there any other amendments to the bill? Okay,
Just substituted the bill.
let's go ahead and do a roll call on the bill.
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson. Representative Harshman. Vice Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman. Representative Wiley.
No.
Representative Yin.
Aye.
Chairman Olson.
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 no.
Bill HB 211 has passed on 8-1 vote. And I will turn this back over to Chairman Olson. He only needs me when he needs a nap, so.
It was a good nap. I appreciate that. We have to be back at 2:00. Is that right, committee? So we have 5 minutes. We don't really have enough time to get into the next bill. So like I said, House Bill 164 was improperly noticed. House Bill 242 is essentially withdrawn by the sponsor. So we will hear House Bill 279 on Friday at our last and final meeting until the crossover. We are adjourned.